Hello, sword people. Welcome to the Sword Guy podcast. This is your host, Dr. Guy Windsor, consulting swordsman, teacher, and writer. Join me for interviews with historical martial arts instructors and experts from a wide range of related disciplines as we discuss swords, history, training, and bringing the joy of historical martial arts into our modern lives. I hope you enjoy this greatest hit episode of the show. You can find all the episodes at swordschool.com/podcast, and there's a direct link in the description to this episode's show notes. On with the show.
I'm here today with David Biggs, who is a lawyer, a diplomat, and a historical martial arts instructor with the Tattershall School of Defense. Beg pardon, a senior instructor with the Tattershall School of Defense. He's known in the SCA as Aeron Harper, where he is a Master of Defense and a Laurel. He's also the organizer, with two previous guests on the show, Losito and Monica Gaudio, of Lord Baltimore's Challenge, one of my favourite historical martial arts events. So, without further ado, David, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Guy. It's great to be here. I love talking to you.
That's very kind of you to say. We've spent rather more time in person lately over the last 5 years or so than like in the previous 15 years put together.
This is true.
Which is great.
It's so true.
Just to orient everybody, whereabouts in the world are you?
So I'm in the D.C. metro area, just north of D.C., Washington,
Right.
D.C., United States.
Which is kind of where you'd expect a sort of State Department person to live.
Exactly, yes.
Yes, in the corridors of power.
I mean, yeah, if you want to take that.
Otherwise known as a malarial swamp that nobody wanted and so got turned into the capital.
Right. Inside the Beltway, which is all swamp-like.
Excellent. So, take us back a few decades. How did you get into historical martial arts?
Sure thing. So back in college, I took several years of Shotokan karate. And as I was leaving college, I married a woman who was getting involved in the SCA. I had gone to a lot of Ren fairs, so I kind of knew who the SCA was a little bit. When I got in, I didn't really care to fence because what I saw was a bunch of people using epes with bell guards and hoo-hoo, ha-ha, ho-ho, and, just very swashbucklering it. And then a friend of mine, David Watson, introduced me to the three Elizabethan fencing manuals. And suddenly I thought, oh, wow, so they wrote this stuff down.
For the people who aren't familiar, what are the three Elizabethan fencing manuals?
Are there three? Anyway, George Silver. Oh, yeah, that's right. George Silver, Giacomo de Grassi's translation, which isn't technically an Elizabethan manual, and Saviolo's manual were all collected together into one book called The Three Elizabethan Fencing Manuals.
Yeah. Turner and Soper, correct?
Turner and Soper, correct.
Yeah. That was a fantastically useful book because it somehow managed to find its way into all sorts of university libraries, and a lot of people, the first treatise they ever saw was like Silver in Turner and Soper or de Grassi in Turner and Soper.
Well, exactly. And so I saw that. I got to be friends with Brian Wilson, and so he handed me a sword that looked vaguely Renaissance, and so I started looking into Saviolo and trying to make Saviolo work.
Right.
This is before I think we have now come to the conclusion that Saviolo was more of a side sword master, more of a cut and thrust. In fact, I've documented his entire book straight out of the Bolognese Masters, so I think he had some influence there. But I was trying to make it work with an epee, right?
Yeah, that's going to work.
So as I was doing that and doing more digging, I came across plates from Capoferro, and this is the late 90s, I believe. Then, what was it? SSI, Sword Symposium International 2000 happened in Houston, and I was living in Houston, so I was like, oh, hey, I'm going to go around the corner and see what this is about. And this was Greg Melee and, oh my God, who all was there? There's a whole stack of people, but also Reinhardt was there, who started the, HACA, Historical Armed Combat Association.
That's Hank Reinhardt, correct?
Hank Reinhardt, that's right. That's right. So a lot of the people who had been also trying to do this, in some cases better, in some cases about the same as me, were all there. So this kind of opened a lot of our eyes to, we're all doing this. And I think a lot of connections were made at that event. That was also the event of a very famous spoon-fecting episode.
We will not discuss the spoon-fecting on the podcast because it will ruin it will ruin it for people who may wish to recreate the
It's
spoon
true,
fecting
but it was
doom.
a magnificent spoon fecting combat. So at some point, I got introduced to William Wilson and Gary and to Roger.
Gary Shellac.
And Roger Siggs.
Yeah.
And they had just started pushing side sword in the SCA. And I had gotten a white scarf, which was the highest level of rapier combat in the SCA at that time. And
just a second. You got on a white scarf, the highest thing of SCA rapier combat at the time. This is in the late 90s. And you do that by basically trying to do Saviola with an epee.
I did it by winning tournaments. So
okay.
No one really knew anything. I was trying to study, and I was actually giving classes and stuff, trying to make it all work in my head. So they thought, well, I was winning tournaments, I was beating people, and I was actually putting some work in. So some people thought, okay, well, that's pretty cool. I was still known as that guy who fights real weird. Because everyone else was training in the French epee style, basically, right?
Right.
So I was convinced that we were going to kill each other with this side sword experiment. And then Roger and I had a day together, and I started seeing, no, there's something to this. This is interesting and this is fun. So I became one of their sidekicks trying to push it throughout the SCA and wrote rules for several of the kingdoms, and we finally got it going. So that was the early 2000s, and that's when Jurek Swinger and Bill Wilson were working on their Capoferro translation and were kind of feeding it out to us. That's when I joined Tattershall.
Just for the record, if they hadn't have produced that translation of Capoferro when they did, I may very well have ended up being a Fabris man rather than a Capoferro man.
You and me both.
It was super important and useful work, and a massive shout out to both Bill and Jurek for that.
I've even said, this is an interesting point, it's no longer as true as it was, but I've even said you can tell when people got into Western martial arts by what they were studying.
Absolutely.
Because there was us doing the Italian rapier, and then soon after that, Tobler came up with the German stuff, and suddenly everyone wanted to do German. Then Puck got big with the Spanish, and everyone wanted to do Spanish, so you could kind of tell where they started in a 3 or 4 year range, you know. So I joined Tattershall. They made me an instructor. I started helping with the interpretation.
Just again, I keep interrupting you for clarifications, but
That's right.
I'm thinking the average listener probably doesn't know what Tattershall is. So if you could just define it.
Tattershall School of Defense. It started in Arizona. Bill Wilson was the one who I think started it in the late 90s. Now, Gary Shellac is our president. It's run mostly out of Southern California. I'm kind of their wandering instructor because...
and it's like a historical martial arts club. Basically.
It's a historical martial arts school. So we started out teaching the side sword manuals and the rapier, but now we have people who are doing Swetnam, who are doing German saber, who are doing, so we've got a lot of people now studying different things. Kind of like Chicago, but not quite as organized. We have study groups around the U.S. that are all kind of giving us their thoughts of what they're doing, and we're trying to get ourselves more organized and more together. So that's Tattershall.
Okay. Yeah.
And you and I met somewhere in there, early 2000s.
It was Lansing 2001 or 2002 or both.
There you go. So I went to 2 Lansings. I only went to 2. You were teaching it there. I can't remember now because a lot of those classes, if you recall, a lot of those classes started blending together because we kept doing the same classes again and again, intro to Capoferro, intro to whatever. So I no longer remember which classes were at WMAW, which ones were at Lansing, But yeah, so that's kind of what got me kicking off. Then I grabbed Dallagokye. Bill was translating Dallagokye and the single sword, and that just blended. That made my heart sing, So that's still, I don't do it as much as I should, but that is still my favorite sword style.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't had you in my head. You're a rapier man, but clearly I'm wrong.
No, you're right, because people keep wanting me to teach rapier, and I keep having to put aside my side sword to focus on rapier because that's what everyone's asking for.
Okay. But Dallagokye for the win.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'm still kicking myself. I didn't have the £3,000 I needed to buy an edition of Dallagokye and De Grassi bound together in a single volume sometime around 1600, and I could have had it for 3,000 quid. And I'm like, but I didn't have 3,000 quid, and I need my kidneys.
I know. No, I've seen a few that I've missed out on. I only have one historical manual personally, but
Is that Marcelli? Is that recall?
Marcelli, yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Okay, so we met at Lansing, and clearly we're still friends now, so things must have gone quite well. But you sort of disappeared. You fell off the radar for about 15 years. What happened?
So around this time, I had some mighty waves in my marriage, and we went through a divorce. So around 2003 and 4 is when that was happening. After that is when I started actually increasing my activity, because I was going 2 or 3 weekends a month to teach all around the U.S. So I've taught in 25 different states around the U.S., and most of that was in that time period between 2004 and 2006. I was just going everywhere to spread the good word. Because of that divorce, I had a therapist kind of helping me work my way through it and all the self-esteem issues that come with divorce. And she was saying, you are undereducated for your intelligence level. You need to go back to grad school. This would help you refocus. This would help you find yourself, So I started looking into different ideas, and I landed on law school. And so in 2006, I entered law school, and I tried to keep studying, but no, that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, so swords or law, you can really only do one at a time.
Right. I got on law review, and that's kind of like a part-time job on top of law school. So the law review manuals here in the U.S. are the academic published manuals of law.
Okay.
And most universities, I think every one of them, has their own law review manual where professors will send articles, and we will choose which ones we want to publish, and then the students are the ones who do the editing and make sure that the footnotes are correctly cited, and then we put them out. So Minnesota's law review, at the time, it was number 10 in the country, possibly in the world, but it was really highly rated. I was so thrilled to get on it, but it was also an entire part-time job on top of law school by itself. So everything else just went away.
Right. And I'm right in thinking that, because I've seen quite a lot of American TV shows that have lawyers in them, and all the best lawyers were like editor of the law review at Harvard. So this is what we're talking about.
Kind of.
So it's good for your career to be involved in the law review.
Absolutely,
process.
absolutely.
Okay.
A lot of the people who are in law review, though, go into education. They are law professors. Right. Barack Obama was the senior editor of Harvard Law Review, for instance.
Well, there we go. Case in point.
Yeah,
didn't do his career any harm at all.
No, not at all, not at all. So it can be a big deal, and one of the things it really does do, and this will play into our conversation in a little bit, is it helps you focus on how to read the words as they are, not as you want them to be.
Right. Oh God, that is so useful.
Yeah.
How many times you're reading something in, I don't know, Fiore or whatever, and you have this interpretation in your head, and you just need the words to say this thing, and with just a little bit of massage,
right,
like subconscious massage, you can actually make them say that thing you want them to say.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this goes back to what you and I talked about at one point. We are where we are in the martial arts here because we are all open to each other's interpretations. Now, there are actors who aren't, right?
Sure.
But this is what I loved about Lansing and WMAW is we would all go back to our own little practices and put things in place and try out our interpretations. Then we would meet back up again, and I would see what you say, and I would see what Bill says, and we would go, oh, well, I figured this new thing out. Let's try this out. And it was this constant being open to everyone else being right and you not being right that was beautiful. It was a magical. And it's now been proven the case, I think, that we did it well. When you look at like the Vienna Anonymous is really in line with all these things that we've been teaching.
Yeah. So, and again, not everyone's read it. So the Vienna Anonymous is basically this description of this fencing student in the early 1600s.
Yep.
Wrote his sort of interpretation of what he was being taught with reference to Fabris and to Capoferro.
Exactly. Reference the 3 manuals, but no one knows who the third one is.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. So he was in, I think, what is now the Czech Republic, writing about, I think Tom was saying mid 1600s, something around those lines. So
I could pull it off the shelf and we could geek out for it.
Nah,
I think we need to keep on track. But yes.
Yeah.
So when the Vienna Anonymous surfaced, it did seem to confirm that we had read a lot of Fabris and Cabafera correctly.
Yeah. Yep. So that again speaks to the whole reading words as they are, not as you want them to be, which I think we all did a pretty good job of.
Yeah. And I think the critical thing to that is when somebody points out that you're reading it wrong, you can actually hear that.
Yeah.
And I have noticed that there are some people who are better at that than others.
Absolutely. There are those who I think they tie their ego too much into, their own interpretation as opposed to wanting to search for the truth or,
But also, like quite a big problem is a lot of people who are working on these things. I'm a good example of one such person. I am not a trained linguist, a trained translator. I've not studied Italian at any particularly high level. I think we had one semester on the Divine Comedy and we did it in Italian, but that was about it. And so it's really, really tempting when someone who actually knows what the words actually mean and can actually read it like an actual book, when you've read it and you've kind of made some sort of twisted interpretation of it and they go, no, it just means this. And this is perfectly straightforward. But there's a word in there which it sounds like an English word, so you think it must mean the same thing as that English word, but actually it means something completely different.
Yep.
And so you end up in this sort of state of having created this entirely false reading of this particular bit of text. And then it's really difficult to just go, oh, you must be right. Oh, yeah, okay, that doesn't work. Because that word does seem to mean what we think it means, but actually it bloody doesn't.
Right. Yep, 100%.
Super hard.
I see people who, I'm going to try and say this without naming names. I see people who blend too much of other knowledge in, and they don't go at it, like we talked about, with an open mind about what may this actually mean. What I did, slight tangent, what I did whenever I sent you my thoughts on the stringere in the Bolognese manuals, what I did was, instead of looking at what the word is interpreted to mean by us, I went and applied how is it used in every case I can find in the 4 Bolognese manuals.
That's because you're a lawyer.
Well, sure. But that told me a whole lot, and it changed my interpretation of stringere because it was used the same way by 3 different masters. Anyway.
But that in itself doesn't always work, because very often the same word means something completely different in different places. And one thing that, I've got a couple of published translations out, and sometimes people email me, but Guy, over here, you translate this word as this English word, but over there, you translate it as something else. And I'm like, yes, because in these 2 different contexts, it means 2 different things.
Right.
Like if we're talking about a water table, or we're talking about a table with a glass of water on it, they are not the same thing. It's like
even British to American English. This is what you and I talked about also. The word constrain, I agree with you. It's the best academic word for stringere. But when you look at it from the American point of view, that it brings up different connotations. And so you have to be careful with using it, because constraint here has BDSM issues, it has, right? So it's
we would say restraint. If you're going to tie someone up, you don't constrain them, you restrain them, we would say.
Right. But constraint has come into our lexicon here in America. Constraints. You're under constraints. You're being tied up, right?
Okay. But just to segue slightly, I think that's exactly what the stringere actually is meaning with swords. It's like the point of my sword position. If I have you stringed, I have constrained your possible courses of action.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
It's just
it doesn't necessarily imply a physical constraint, but it doesn't rule it out either.
Right.
You can string someone with physical constraint, but
right.
But
I'm just talking about what appears in your head. And when you're teaching a new person and you use that word, the thing that appears in their head may not be what you want it to be.
Well, but that's always true with every student and every bit of technical terminology. So I'm not sure. But I'm illuminated that the first thing that pops into your head when I say constraint is BDSM. David,
shut up.
Don't worry, you're amongst friends. No judgment here.
No judgment.
We should get Ariel back on the show. Okay, so So you got into law school. We sort of went off on a nice little sidetrack.
Yeah.
So you're at law school and you're studying what the words actually mean in their various contexts. And so you're back at law school and you're doing law review. And what happened next?
So I graduated in 2009, which is the same year that the world melted down economically.
Yeah.
So I had a job lined up at the Patent and Trademark Office, the USPTO here in DC. They called me like the month before I graduated and said, we can no longer hire lawyers for the foreseeable future. Can you hold on for a bit? And of course, my answer is no.
No. Well, independently wealthy.
Right.
Of course.
So I won't say I struggled, but I suddenly had to get myself going and figure out something else that I could do to make money. I met a diplomat who talked about the foreign service process of getting into the foreign service and went through the process and I got in. So my first try, that's a year-long process. So I had to do a bunch of, I was working for a nonprofit until then. But yeah, so then I kind of went directly into the foreign service, which then sends you all around the world.
Okay. Where did you go?
My first posting was Ottawa. So,
okay, that's really far away.
I know. I told a friend of mine in Boston, I just got posted to the one place that is closer to me than it is to you right now. But yeah, so I went to Ottawa and I was busy in my first job, so I couldn't do a whole lot of SCA. I did a little bit of fencing. I worked with John and Zenas and a couple of others there. John. So I was kind of picking up a little bit of the rapier, but it wasn't a big focus. I was trying to work on my new job, right? Then I went into a year of Russian training, which is kind of like law school. It sucked my entire time. And then we went to Ukraine. And the only thing happening in Ukraine at that time was a lot of the, what I call cry uncle sword fighting. Stuff I really wasn't interested in, putting on armor and beating each other until one of you can't stand anymore was kind of the...
So this is what was going on in the Ukraine?
This was the only sword fighting I could find in Ukraine. So I wasn't really interested in picking that back up. And again, when we were in Ukraine, suddenly a lot of things started happening and we were on crisis mode for like the last 18 months I was there. So there wasn't time to do anything outside of just working. So after that, we came back to the U.S. We had Roxanne. We came back to the U.S. I actually didn't have any drive to get back into sword play. I was doing some other things. I had some other hobbies.
So, 1 second. So you've met Alex and Roxanne is your daughter.
Yes, I'm sorry. So
that's okay. No, David, it is my job to look out for the listener and fill in the natural gaps. Don't worry.
So Alex was a student of mine, and he brought her to me at an SCA event and said, "Teach her side sword." So this was, oh my God, 2004 or 5. And then years later, I found out that she was moving to Madison, Wisconsin, which was only 3 or 4 hours from me in Minneapolis. So we started dating at that point in time.
Okay.
And then when I went in the Foreign Service, she left her PhD program and went in the Foreign Service with me. And so we were a tandem couple in the Foreign Service being thrown around the world.
So what's her specialization in the Foreign Service? You're a lawyer. What does she do?
Well, so actually I wasn't a lawyer. Well, so I was in the econ specialization, which is basically there's political, economics, management, which is the people that run the embassies, consular, which was Alex. They're the ones who focus on visas and immigration, and then public diplomacy. They're the ones who are the voice for all the embassies. Yeah. So
what most people think of when they think diplomat.
Right. And they're the ones who arrange all the press briefings and that kind of stuff. It's their job to do that. I was in the econ, and I specialized in science and technology diplomacy. So that was the thing I wanted to do most of all. Alex did consular work. She was the immigration consular chief in Ukraine, and came back here and kept doing immigration fraud work. So that's kind of what we did. But you're also supposed to be able to move around in different jobs when you're in the Foreign Service. So there's no way to really stay in any one thing. Right. Because you just go to where you need to go.
Okay. So then you came back to the US and took up the swords again?
Well, I came back to the US, and a friend of mine here, Candace, called me and said, "Hey, we would love you to come train at this this SCA practice that's close." So I dug out all my old notes to remember what it was that I used to know, and went and just started teaching basics, how to lunge, which people still have a hard time with, how to hold the sword, as you well know, is a hard thing.
Like, no.
Right. So
Yeah.
that kind of got me back into it. And then I discovered that HEMA had popped up while I had been roaming around the world. And I know the history of the HEMA. WMA is kind of split and whatever, but
I see. Okay, there isn't really one. There's Western martial arts was what a certain group of historical martial artists were calling it in North America, and the term sort of was used a bit in Europe. And then historical fencing, historical swordplay, historical European martial arts. These are all basically the same thing over here. And now, for a lot of people, HEMA is synonymous with the longsword tournament scene.
right.
But that's really only true for people who are in the longsword tournament scene, right?
So that is you're right. That is how it's viewed in Europe. Here, as I watched it kind of pop up, and this is possibly my faulty memory, and Greg would probably kick me for saying things like this. The Western martial arts world really wasn't interested in tournaments that much. They were more interested in the study and in the academics.
And fencing as a research tool rather than fencing for competition.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Tattershall and we hold that tournament is just one more tool to apply to test you under pressure, right?
Sure.
And to try to force yourself to continue to use the right techniques in a high tense situation. So we still agree that tournament is a useful tool. It's not the end result. It's not what you should be aiming for, but it's a good tool. So then my view from here in America is people were getting frustrated by not having tournaments, and so they started putting tournaments, and that's where HEMA started popping up. The word HEMA is attached to those tournaments. So if you see from our point of view, they started using HEMA as their umbrella to do tournaments, where Western martial arts was the umbrella to do the academics, right?
Well, I have a funny little aside on that.
Okay.
I've had Jake Norwood on the show, and I remember when Jake Norwood first came to the Western Martial Arts Workshop in Racine in like 2008, right? And he was like from the HEMA side of things. He was he'd helped start the Long Point major event, massive tournaments and blah, blah, blah. And he came out of the WMAW thing saying he had never fenced so much in a weekend in his whole life.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
It wasn't tournament, like competition tournament fencing, but everyone fenced him whenever, he could get a pickup fight in 2 seconds any time he wanted. And he spent most of the weekend fencing.
Yep.
And at the same time, he was also highlighting to us that Long Point was not just tournaments. They had classes and stuff as well. It's just people didn't talk about those as much. But if you look at the actual schedule, there was as much class time as there was tournament time. So, I think the black and white division of it is necessarily leaving out an awful lot of grey areas. There's a lot more overlap than
I'm painting with broad brushes. I absolutely will say that. But I'll say this too about Long Point. The classes were ancillary. The classes were scheduled up against other tournaments, and so you had to choose whether you wanted to fight or go to a class. And so it automatically filtered those who wanted to do study versus combat, tournament combat.
Okay.
And in fact, jumping ahead, I don't mean this as bad as I say it, but I went to the last Long Point that had rapier tournaments here and watched how it ran, and that's what kind of cued me in. I can do something better than this. I can make it work better.
Okay. With all due respect to the Long Point crowd, many of whom have been on this show, and they were doing something slightly different. Okay, so
and they admitted that they bit off way more than they could chew that last year with rapier and all the tournaments they had. So it was a lot. It was a whole lot.
Okay, so this might be a good time to think about Lord Baltimore's challenge.
Sure.
Should we throw that in there? So you come back, you rejoined the SCA and...
Rejoined the SCA and met Losito. She was a student of Tom Leone, and so she was interested in historical swordplay more than the SCA. So this is kind of why Candace dragged me back. She said, Lisa wants more of the historical stuff, and you're the one I know to do it the best. So come
okay.
Teach. So Lisa then kind of started poking me to come to HEMA events, and so I went, and in my very problem-solving brain, I was watching what was going on and thinking about how to twist it and do it a little bit better and how to whatever, and so that kind of built the idea of I think I know how I can do something here better than this. The kingdom I live in doesn't really do tournaments.
Spoken like a good US diplomat.
I mean, they do them every once in a while, but it's not to the level that I was doing when I was in Texas. And it's not, they don't tend to want to do things like just a skill-based tournament. They tend to do fun things like here, win some coins and go chase the box.
And just, again, there will be people listening who don't know what an SCA kingdom is. It's like a large sort of regional organization of the SCA. So my joke about you being a US diplomat living in a kingdom in America, and that's kind of ironic. Yeah, that was probably quite a bad joke. It was a terrible joke.
No, and it's fun. I know of actual diplomats who are like, I know of an ambassador who's in the SCA who's posted abroad. So it's kind of even funnier for someone like that.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, so this idea got in my head and I kept rolling it around. And so I reached out to a few of my friends because this is not something I could do on my own. And that's a big hurdle for me because I hate asking for help. It's difficult for me to ask people to help. So I pulled together a group and who all said, yeah, this sounds great. And then we just kind of rolled with it. And so I funded it, the first one, out of pocket, got all that, we made a profit on the first one, but it was just a matter of getting a bunch of people who have all run SCA events. So they've all been involved in what it takes to put together an event and, insurance, whatever, all the whole thing. And I came up with the rule set and I came up with the concept of we need to bring in experienced instructors as a draw, but then use those instructors for directors because what makes a good director and a good judge is the experience, is being able to break down the fight in your head, run it backwards and see what happened, right?
Okay, yeah.
So that's where I was coming from. So yeah, my first year, so I had a lot of maestros. I had a lot of people who had the classical fencing masters, and they were able to do exactly what I wanted, to be great ring directors, and we had some good judges. So it ran well. A lot of people said, this is the best thing I've ever fought in. Let's do it again. So, now we just finished last year, our third iteration, pandemic being in the middle of all that.
I was there.
Yep, you were there. You remember.
I do. To my mind, Lord Baltimore's challenge is half tournaments, half classes.
Right.
All you've mentioned so far is the tournaments. And it feels like what you're really doing is setting up a tournament that was like an alternative to...
I'm actually doing the opposite. If I had my druthers, I would want to do a weekend of just seminars. But I do, like I said, I do believe tournaments have a purpose. They have a use. And the tournaments are, one, kind of the draw for a lot of people, but two, they are what funds half of LBC.
Okay, because people will pay to travel to a tournament more than they'll pay to travel to seminars.
That's the first thing. And the second thing is the way I broke down the pay structure. In order to not be overwhelmed by everyone entering a tournament, you have to pay $25 to get into a tournament. So you enter $40 and then you pay $25 per tournament. Because my thought was, if I just say, pay to enter, everyone's going to sign up for a tournament whether they fight in it or not. And then that's a kerfuffle of paperwork and,
Yeah. So by having the tournament as like a optional add-on that costs more money, it filtered out those who weren't that interested.
Exactly. And if I charged instead, say $80 for a weekend seminar with you, with Puck, with Dave Koblentz, I might get fewer people and therefore couldn't have afforded to fly you guys in.
I just had an idea.
Okay.
So the problem with tournaments as a learning environment is there is lots and lots and lots and lots of competitive free play, which is great, but there's no space to do the competitive free play, learn something, go train it, and then go back into the environment, right? So it's really useful, but let's say you learn early on that your, defense on your inside line isn't up to scratch, and that's what knocks you out halfway through the day. That's a useful thing to go away and train in your home thing, but you're missing the usefulness. So here's a thought, right? You have a group of students, 20, 30, 40, whatever. Maybe you split them into groups. They run a pool right? Where everyone gets 4 or 5 bouts in a tournament type setting, right? Which is more than enough to learn something useful. Then their ring director sets up the training so that whatever issues they were finding, they can work on. And then, so that's like for an hour. And then you run the pool again. So it'd have to be quite small pools, and it would have to be, you may not complete the pool. And then at the end of the day, or at the end of the weekend, you have a record of all of these tournament fights, right? And so you can have a winner. You might even have like the last event is like a knockout tournament. Yeah. So you have a winner if you want. But rather than it being fence all day and then study the next day, it's fence for an hour, work on those corrections for an hour, fence for an hour, work on those corrections for an hour, back and forth.
So
wouldn't that be better?
We are on the same page. In fact, this is a variation of what you suggested when you left last time. And I've been rolling it around.
I forgot.
So I've been rolling this around my head because your suggestion was that you teach your how to evaluate yourself class and then break up into pools and then do exactly what you just said and then spend the rest of the day, once they understand kind of a better idea of how to evaluate themselves, then send them off. And that's basically kind of a tournament training process, which is exactly what you just described. So this October, so neither Lisa nor I had the spoons to do a full LBC this year. It was, we're both busy. We both have a lot of things going on. So I'm going to make the LBC tournament thing every other year.
Okay.
But this October, I'm going to rent a kind of a park, and I'm going to bring Kayaton, and I'm going to bring probably Justin back, and I've reached out to a few others. If I can afford it, I'll bring you in.
Okay.
That's the big question with you. Because this is going to be a very light lift, inexpensive, but I want to do exactly what you said. So here's what my thought is for October. One day, everyone gets to teach whatever classes they want, but I'm going to give everyone like 2.5 hours. So teach a 90-minute class and then spend an hour helping everyone walk through what you just taught them, right? Then the next day, do exactly what you just said, make it all a big tournament thing. So put everyone in pools and then have them evaluate, and then put everyone in pools and have them evaluate.
I just had another idea.
Uh-oh.
Right.
Go
okay.
ahead.
So let's say you've got, I don't know, Kaya, Justin, and me, and you, 4 people, and there's like, I don't know, 80 attendees. So we've got 20 each, and they are randomly assigned to our various groups. Okay. This is probably a terrible idea, but who knows? Okay. Our job is to train those people to beat everyone else. And so the final round of pools is like my top 4 versus your top 4 versus Pat's top 4 versus Justin's top 4. Yeah. And it gets
so
a bit of
Team Guy, Team Justin, Team Kayaton.
Exactly. Because then also, if you think about it, let's say I had, I don't know, 12 students, or maybe it's 20 or whatever, right? You probably want a fairly small number for this to work really well, because then you don't spend so much time setting things up. Okay. There will be some kind of tournament-y process within their group that decides which 2 people get sent into the finals. Yeah, or 3 people or whatever. Tournament numbers better than I do. Right. And it has to be a bit of fun, right? It mustn't be taken too seriously. But then those 2 people, when they are representing their new club, they have a bunch of cheerleaders with them.
Yeah.
Who are invested in their success.
Yeah.
And here's a thought, because when you're training with each other, you are making each other better. So in the training portions of the session, right, whoever you're training with, you're trying to make them better. So if they go off and win a tournament, then you have part of that. So the prize is distributed amongst the entire group.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah? Isn't that a genius idea?
I like that.
Okay. Big problem with it. Right? Some people will have literally flown across America because they want to take Kaya's class, and they get stuck in mine.
Well, but that's why we have individual classes on one day, and then we do this thing on the second day. So they have a chance to take Kaya's classes. So if I haven't decided to make it 2 days yet, but I'm rolling it around my head because the place that I found is pretty cheap. I can get it for not much at all. The question I have, in order to make this work, with the amount of bandwidth we have, this would have to be a self-call tournament only. We couldn't have.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what I would probably do if I have one of these groups, let's say I've got, I don't know, 10 students or 12 students or whatever, and we need to start eliminating, I will say, okay, you guys split up, fence to 5 hits, winners go in this group, they fence each other, losers go in that group, they fence each other. And so it's all done. So there isn't too much of that. I mean, something's riding on it because you're trying to get through to the next. Right. And there will be occasions when a bit of friendly oversight is necessary, but they should be able to judge themselves. Right. So
I like it.
If they're in groups of 3, right, you can have one presiding, 2 fencing, one presiding, 2 fencing, one presiding, 2 fencing, right? And so they have a supervisor to kind of call fair hits, or if there's any dispute, tell them to run it again or whatever.
Right.
So there's ways of doing it which aren't entirely casual, and which also give them experience at sort of ring directing and presiding and judging.
I love it. And I'm gonna roll this around and play with it. You tell me how your October looks later on, and let's look at the cost.
Okay.
I mean, seriously.
I'm talking myself into a job. Brilliant, lovely.
I know you hate that.
Yeah. All these swords and stuff, incredibly boring. I've just checked my calendar, and you'll be happy to hear it's currently relatively open in October.
Fantastic. All right, let's keep talking about that later on.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now we've been talking quite a lot about the SCA, and anyone who's spent any time on social media where swords are mentioned will be aware that there's some major kerfuffle going on within the Society for Creative Anachronism. Now, before you get into it, I just want to be clear to people listening that you are a long-time member of the SCA and have its best interests at heart. And so many of the people I respect in this field come from the SCA that we're not talking about like the people, we're talking about the structure.
Right.
Yeah?
100%. Right. So let me start there. Everyone I know, and I mean almost literally everyone, they go into the SCA because their friends are there, because the people are there. Yeah. And almost everyone I know has complaints about the culture and the structure of the SCA. Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack here, but I'll start with what happened. There was a war, Gulf War, which happens in South Mississippi every year.
By war, you mean great big event where everyone gets together and fights?
Great big event, everyone gets together and fights, and there are large melees of hundreds of people on each side. Yeah. And many of them. There are lots of different melees. So we consider them friendly. They have their own rule set because all these different regions, these kingdoms are coming together. And so they have to all agree on which rules are which ones we're going to follow. As you might guess, the SCA has safety manuals where you have to show that you are safe, that you know what the armor requirements are, you know what the fighting requirements are, before you can get authorized to fight. So we've had these for years. They change slightly, but So
whatever. Basically like a driving license to go on the field. Effectively.
Yeah. And then we have marshals, and marshals have to go through their own training, kind of like an umpire or a referee, right? They have to know what to watch for, and they are empowered to toss people off the field if they're being unsafe or if they can't find that they're authorized. Okay, Important points here. So there was a person who has high rank, a duke in the SCA, who word on the street a week before the Gulf Wars happened was that he was going to come fight Rapier, and that no one could figure out whether or not he was actually authorized to do so. He showed up. He walked up with an authorization card that wasn't properly signed. The Rapier marshal in charge of the entire event, eventually it got to him, and he bounced him, and he said, you can't fight. That guy went and threw a huge fit, got his own rattan marshal, not Rapier, but the rattan fighting, to sign off and to give him a sticker, and then he came back and he tried to get in again. Once more got bounced after a lot of back and forth for not following the rules. And then he complained up the chain to the top of the SCA. He did not complain up the chain to the top of the war. So the war has its own structure and its own marshalate structure. He went around all that and complained up to the president of the SCA because they're all dukes and because they all know each other.
Yeah, sure.
So the feeling was that he had broken the rules. Okay, I'm sorry, the feeling from the rapier people were that he had broken the rules. The feeling from a lot of the heavy fighters is that the rapier person was acting outside of their authority by telling a duke, no, you can't come on the field.
Right.
So in the end, the SCA sanctioned the rapier person, didn't give any sanction at all to the dukes who were trying to break the rules, and this caused a big kerfluffle.
Well, so I mean, really, what you need in a safety marshal is someone who can tell a duke to go boil his own head because he's not qualified and so can't step on the field.
100%. 100%.
That is what you're looking for in a safety marshal.
You want someone who can stand up whenever they're saying something isn't right here. You need to set out today. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I mean, even if he'd been like, I don't know, perhaps he'd misread the paperwork and so was technically wrong. Even so, you need him to be able to say, no, your paperwork's not correct. Therefore, legally, I can't let you on the field. Terribly sorry.
The corporate documents say that the authorization paperwork needs to be properly signed and you need to be able to present it when asked.
Right.
It was not properly signed. And from what I've been able to tell, none of the rapier marshals in that region ever heard who authorized this guy.
Right.
And people keep claiming, oh, but he was definitely authorized. And no, there's no definite because no one can tell anyone which rapier marshals were the ones who watched him and taught him.
And if he was authorized, he would have a piece of paper saying that. If you don't have the paper, you're not authorized.
And also, there's a rule in the corporate government documents that say once you are authorized, it has to go in the database. So they are required to put it in the database, which no one did.
Right.
So there was a number of reasons that the person in charge of rapier said, you did not meet this rule and this rule, basically. Mm-hmm. So for safety reasons, and I'm sure there was more heated discussion than this, but for safety reasons, you can't come onto my field. What the SCA has basically said, what the board of directors has said, is that a duke's right to go on the field and fight is more important than all the safety rules that we have in place.
Well, it is a monarchy.
It is. It is. And this is part of the problem. This is why I'm saying the culture is a problem. The culture is that we unconsciously accept that these rulers, these dukes, actually have power when it's actually just a game side thing.
Yeah.
But people conflate the 501c3 organization, tax-free organization, with the inside game, structure.
Right. Yes.
And that's what's happening. The game structure people are also the ones who tend to step up to the board, and so it gets very blended together.
Right. Okay. So you got involved. Why?
So my wife noticed in the corporate documents that it says very clearly, any communications with the board of directors that aren't marked confidential are public.
Okay.
So she wrote the board and said, hey, I note this rule that is in the governing documents. I would like you to send out and present to us all of these documents that are exchanges of information between the board and these people that aren't marked confidential and that aren't otherwise protected by, privacy laws.
Right. Fair. So it's basically doing what's called a Freedom of Information Act request.
Effectively, yeah. In fact, we use that term, and people were like, "Oh, but this is not the government." I'm like, "No, we're analyzing, we're analogizing is what we're doing, right?" So yeah, she did exactly that, and they told her no. So she came back and she's like, "No, I don't think you understand. This is what the rules say. I'm requesting this," and they started getting ruder and ruder in their no's, and so they were dismissing the smartest person I think I've ever known, right, out of hand.
Yeah, I've met Alex. So I wouldn't want to argue with her.
Yeah. So I decided that I guess this organization who is based on a hierarchy needed to see a JD writing in.
Yeah.
So I wrote in support of her request, laying out in very large detail with 83 footnotes on why they were incorrect about what they were saying to her and why that they were now legally liable and opening themselves up to lawsuits by not doing what their corporate documents say they're supposed to do.
Right.
That got a very interesting response. And I can't remember what made me do this, but I followed it up now by taking a look at some of the sanctions that they have passed down and how the SCA is not following its own rules. And it's important to say I wasn't looking at the facts because I don't have all the facts. I was looking at the rules put in place and how the board followed the rules and how they broke all these rules.
Right, because the rules of the thing, because it's a legally incorporated non-profit organization,
100%.
It's corporate governance, if you like. Those rules are absolutely explicit. They're written down. Anyone can read them. And you are obliged by law to follow them, or you are breaking the law.
You are obliged by law to follow them, and you cannot go outside them. You cannot just make up your own rules and say we're following them.
Okay.
There's a legal concept that I wrote about, and I'm gonna slaughter this because I'm not a Latin speaker, but it's ultra vires.
Yeah.
And that means you're going beyond your power. And organizations have been shut down because they were shown to be willy-nilly making up rules without actually putting them in their corporate documents. You have to bring them up, vote on them, publish them. There's this whole process.
So if you want to change the published rules,
Yep.
you have to go through a proper procedure, publish it, make it public, and now you can then follow those new rules.
Exactly. You
Okay,
cannot
and they
just
didn't
simply
do
say,
Okay.
And you cannot just simply say, well, we could pass this rule, so therefore we're going to do it. That's not
Right.
the way this works, right?
Yeah, and companies do this all the time. I mean, how often does a week go by where you don't get an email from some company saying we are changing our terms of service, please go and have a look and accept them?
Yep. Exactly right.
Because they're
Exactly.
obliged to inform you of any change to the terms of service. Okay.
So what I did is I showed the emperor has no clothes, that they are and again, the members of the board, all the ones I've known are great people.
Sure.
My argument is they are in over their heads. None of them have very few of them have legal training. Very few of them have a background in the ability to read corporate documents and apply them, let alone read the laws of California and the laws of the United States and see how those all mesh, right? So we don't have a professional board. We don't have professional officers. And I was trying to point out this is a problem, people. So that's kind of what it came down to. The SCA has lost multiple lawsuits or settled multiple lawsuits. And a lot of the ones that I've read have this exact same argument in it, that you guys aren't following your own rules. You have rules in place and you're not following them.
Okay. And as a result, Dukes are getting preferential treatment at the expense of safety.
I mean, yes. So what it seems to me is that, and I'm going to be as generous as I can here, it seems to me that everyone simply assumes that certain people have power. So when they read the documents, they read into it, well, clearly these guys have this power. So, oh, look, here's this one clause that backs me up. But they don't read these 6 other clauses that limit that power. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's what's going on, is everyone is trying to read these governing documents with an already assumption in their head of what they should say, and they stop when they find the thing that backs up that assumption, and then they wave it around.
Right. Now, there has been some, shall we say, what's the kindest way to put it? Politically stupid comments. Can I just let me float a catchphrase at you and see if you catch it. All right. 0.5%.
Yeah. So
what's that all about?
So someone who is the spokesperson for the board of directors, who is apparently no longer the spokesperson for the board of directors, made an unwise, and this is not the first time she's done it, posting on her on her very public, but her own Facebook page. And it seems very much that it was dismissing the concerns of all the people who were writing letters into the board of directors. That has now lit up a lot of other people to start writing more letters in. So now there's also a hashtag I'm seeing that says, "We are number 126." In other words, we're sending in after the 125 that you've quoted.
So basically 125 people sent in letters of complaint. It's a 25,000 strong organization, and 125 out of 25,000 is 0.5%.
Yes, and
It's still 125 people.
Well, let me put this in context. That's 125 people who wrote over the course of about 5 days.
Right.
So, and if you know anything about marketing, you should know that for every one person who wrote, there's between 10 and 30 who didn't write.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
now you're looking up at around 10% who are pretty upset at the SCA if you take that marketing, that very well researched marketing, to heart. And I suspect that they have far more than 125 that have written in at this point in time.
Yeah. Okay. Where do you see this going?
Alex has put out a petition that is asking the BOD to reorganize. They need more people on the BOD.
The board of directors.
The board of directors. Yep. Sorry. They are overwhelmed. They only have between 5 and 7 people at any one time. And they need more people because they're always overwhelmed. We need professionals at the top. The president's position needs to be professional. The vice president of operations, the one who basically interprets the rules, needs to be professional and needs to have training in rules interpretation. There needs to be training for everyone of the BOD, the board of directors who comes in, so that they understand how documents work and how to interpret them, and what their own personal liability is if they get it wrong. They should all understand that very clearly. And this is what effectively Alex is saying, is we need to bring in an outside corporate, not investigator, but someone who can basically look at the state of the business and say, here are my recommendations.
Basically a management consultant.
Management consultant, a good one for nonprofits, who understands nonprofits. And one of the issues that I've heard is that they tried to do this years ago, and in one case, they decided not to listen to the person, and in the other case, the person basically, in theory, was enacting a lot of shady financial things. So they don't have a lot of good experience with bringing in people from the outside. Okay. So this is where the petition that we have in place is trying to get at, and it's not pointing fingers. It's saying you guys are overwhelmed and you need help, effectively.
Okay. So if all goes well, this will be a stimulus to a useful change in how the SCA is run.
One would hope. There's a few other things that I think should happen, and a lot of other people too. They need to really divide the game side versus the corporate side very clearly. That needs to be a very clear divide, and the rules in place need to be very clear. I also think that we need to rework the marshalate structure in a very significant way, and that will get a lot of pushback from the armored community. So,
how do you mean? What changes would you recommend?
Right now, the armored marshal, the rattan fighting marshal, is the one in charge of everything. So the Society Earl Marshal is basically the rattan marshal. And that's how it happens in every kingdom. The kingdom Earl Marshal is the rattan marshal, and then everyone else is a deputy underneath that.
So basically what you've got is chairman of the Joint Chiefs is always from the Navy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And therefore the Navy gets a lot of perks.
Yeah.
And so my changes mine and many others have had the same thought, would be that the senior marshal needs to be an administrative position who collects reports and who basically reports to the board. And then each of the deputies needs to have the full power of their discipline. So an equestrian deputy, an archery deputy, a rapier deputy, that kind of thing.
So actually the person who's top of the tree when it comes to the actual boots on the ground, practical marshalling stuff is the deputy, and the Earl Marshal is the one who kind of basically interfaces between all the different disciplines and the board.
Right. Yep. Right. And the one who should be able to pull together reports quickly. What are our injury rates in all the different disciplines? That person should be able to say, I can quickly get you that.
And here's the thing, right? If it's got a title like Earl Marshal, people will want it who shouldn't have it.
Yep.
Because honestly, when you describe that job, I think that is the last job on earth I would want. I would rather clean toilets in a nasty pub than do that kind of admin stuff, because it would just melt my brain to pieces and I'd be rubbish at it. And a lot of people will get cross with me for good reason.
And let me take that and run with it. My argument that I made in one of the papers that I wrote was, if you're an Earl Marshal of a kingdom, you shouldn't want to have the ability to override the equestrian experts in your kingdom and the rapier experts in your kingdom. You should be saying, no, I have to listen to them because they know what they're doing, and I've never trained in horse before. I've never trained in rapier before. So my argument is, from a legal point of view, you should separate yourself from those other disciplines that you've never trained in.
Right. Yeah.
But what do I know?
Well, quite a lot, apparently.
I mean...
And it could help. And, I have an interview coming up, actually in the schedule, it's the next one after this, with someone who was injured in the SCA during a safety test thing because the person running the test was basically overruled the protest of the person being tested, and basically made this person keep hitting harder and harder and harder until eventually an injury occurred. And it was basically manipulating their position to get a pesky woman out of the way by injuring her. Right?
And
it's awful. You probably know what I'm talking about.
Actually, there's a problem. I don't, because I've heard this story many, many times from different people.
Okay.
This is a culture. This is a culture in the SCA, and you will hear, mostly on the armored field, but also in rapier, teaching through pain. You will hear that over and over again. Yeah.
And a sort of, like, the thing that has never attracted me about the SCA is the hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right? I just can't get my head around the idea of calling someone Lord or Duke or whatever when, they're just billed from accounts,
So, yes, I have used the SCA for my own purposes the entire time I've been in it.
Okay.
And that is a test bed for rapier, to use the structure to practice in SCA practices or to go to tournaments or whatever. So I've never really been taken with the persona play, with the Lord Lady, with the, Duke, Duchess, whatever. And that has given me kind of the ability to be somewhat distant from it, as opposed to really engaged and my title being part of my personality,
What is your title? Master of Defense? Is that
master twice, because the Laurel's a master and the Defense is a master. So some people say maestro, some people say magistra. My wife uses magistra because it's a 12th century term for teachers, for professors. I don't tend to go by my titles usually. I just write my name and then order the Laurel or order Defense. I don't put Master Aeron Harper.
Okay. But you chose the name Aeron Harper. Mm-hmm. Am I right in thinking the Harper has something to do with actual harps?
Interestingly enough, kind of. So when I was looking at names, my little sister's name is Erin, E-R-I-N. And I saw the Gaelic A-E-R-O-N and thought, that sounds interesting. I like that. I like the roll that R. I like the way it sounds. And then I had just started building harps. And so I was like, and I know that Harper is a period name. It's easily documentable. So I just threw that together and that became the name, right? Yes.
That's someone who plays or makes harps?
I think it's someone who plays. I don't think it's someone who makes, but
okay. But you do.
Vague there. But I do.
Yes, and I'm being a little bit disingenuous because, of course, I've been to your house and I've dug around in your woodpile and I've actually played one of your harps. That's overstating the case. I have sat on the sofa and strummed the strings of one of your harps. We wouldn't call it actually playing.
Right.
So, as you know, I'm a woodworker. I think everyone listening has probably been bored to death about me talking about chisels and stuff. So, did you start your woodworking career with harps, or?
I kind of did, actually.
Okay.
So
it's a hard place to start.
It is, but I'll say this, and this is why I say kind of. My grandfather was a carpenter and a woodworker. He was not a fine woodworker. He was a nail it together and glue it down and make it work. He built houses for a while, and then he started building kind of simple furniture. So I grew up watching him in the wood shop, just out there kind of seeing what he did and how he did it. So when I was dating my first wife, she had a little harp made by someone in Louisiana that had fallen apart, or actually it had pulled itself apart when it sat in the sun. The glue melted and it just...
ouch. Yeah.
Right. So she had it repaired, and they repaired it just fine, but I looked at the design and I was like, I know how to fix that. So back to the whole long point thing, I looked at it and thought, I can do better than that. So I sat down and designed engineered a harp and thought, I want to make this. And so we took a week and went to my grandpa's farm and sat in his wood shop, and I banged out like 4 or 5 harp pieces. So I had enough for like 4 harps or so. And so I put one together and it worked just fine. Eventually I had put enough together that I started selling them. And at this point in time, I think I've built about 30.
That's a lot of harps.
Yeah, it's over the course of a long time. It's over the course of 20 years plus. But I've changed my design a few times, and then I got a hold of, and the one that you played, I got a hold of blueprints from Germany of a supposedly 16th century Gothic harp, and designed and built that.
Okay.
So that's how I got into it, basically. It's just been over the years, I try something, I look at it, oh, look, that joint didn't work well. How can I fix that joint? Go back again. So I've gone through like 3 or 4 iterations of my design.
You must know Andrew Lawrence King.
Yep.
Yeah. He's been on this show before. We'll put a link in the show notes. I've been in his kitchen, where his wife at the time, who also builds harps, had just finished quite a big one. It must have been about 4 foot tall.
Yep.
And he would play it a little bit, and then she would sort of open up this box in the middle of it and reach in and scrape a little bit with a chisel and brush out the shavings, and then close it back up again, and he'd play it again, and it would sound different, even to my ears. And I have cloth ears. It would sound different, right?
Yep.
How do you learn that?
You learn it by doing it.
Okay.
I have only tuned my soundboards a little bit. I haven't tuned them to that degree. She was very good.
Yeah. She was making harps for a professional world-class historical harpist.
Right. And she was making a Baroque harp, if I remember correctly. That was her specialty. The larger Baroque, the bigger bodies. Yeah. With the smaller Renaissance harp, there's a question about whether they actually tuned that way, whether they actually, really fine-tuned to that point. But my favorite lute maker, Robert Lundberg, who, bless his soul, has died, he talks about tuning lute bodies, lute bellies. Mm-hmm. And what he would do is before he put it all together, he would hold it up, and he would hold it by the bass support and just tap it all around. And then he would shave off bits of the support until he had the tone where he wanted. He localized the bass to the bottom of the belly, and he localized the tenor to the top of the belly, that kind of thing. So there's lots of different ways to tune the belly of your harp or of your lute, and it really just simply takes doing it and figuring it out. I mean, each piece of wood is different from each other piece of wood.
Right.
So it takes the experience of knowing where to remove the thickness without compromising the strength versus, the thickness, right?
Yeah, and like 2 bits of oak might be more different than a bit of oak and a bit of ash.
Yep.
Just depending on how the tree grew and okay.
Right. The seasons, the water table, the whole thing. Yep.
So do you make anything else other than harps?
I've made a few lyres, and I've made a whole bunch of furniture of different types. I've made sword stands. I've made.
I think everyone's made sword stands, whether they're woodworkers or not.
I know. I can't think of much else. I mean, I just anything that comes to mind that I can make out of wood, I make out of wood. This desk I'm sitting in right now, I made. The one beside me, my grandpa made.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I just whenever I think of something looks interesting or I want to test myself, I do it. But unlike you, I don't continually do it. So every time I come back to my project, I have to relearn how my chisel works and kind of relearn how to tune my.
Oh, really?
Playing.
So you jump in and out?
I do.
So I'm guessing you didn't do a lot of woodwork in the Ukraine.
No, zero. I had to pack my entire shop up and leave it. I had to pack up a lot of my hobbies and leave them behind because we had an apartment in downtown Kiev, and that was a no-no.
Yeah, I have a friend who used to do woodworking quite seriously and then moved to an apartment in the middle of Edinburgh, and so he switched to stained glass.
So yeah, I can see that. I did. So there's an article I read about a guy who's one of the top violin repairists, and he lives in a small apartment in New York City, and he has this closet where he just opens it up. His entire shop kind of just comes down, and he has all of his hand tools in front of him. I'm in awe of that guy.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I do like these sort of hideaway workshop setups. I mean, I really like having an enormous workshop with loads of space and natural light. Right? And that would be ideal. But like tool organization and having it so that I've seen like in woodworking magazines, people have these amazing, like it looks like an ordinary cupboard, but open it up and it's just like chisels and planes and everything, and then there's this table underneath it actually happens to be super stable and bolted to the wall, and there's a vise that kind of just pops onto it, and
yep, 100%.
kind of stealth woodworking.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing that a violin repairer like that, working at that level, he's working on instruments that are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh, even
He's
millions.
probably, he's probably working on one at a time. He's never in any rush.
Right.
And you don't really need a lot of space for that sort of thing.
No. And I mean, you might have seen, the planes that you use on violins are this small,
tiny.
right?
Yeah.
They're tiny little things.
About the size of your thumb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, no, agreed. I mean, the fact that I want to work on big furniture and harps kind of makes the fact that I need a bigger shop than that guy does.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I have an optimal kind of working size. Like, I like to work on things that are sort of between about 4 feet long down to about 6 inches on the side.
Yeah.
Right? Anything smaller than that, I get a bit lost. Although I have taken up watch repair a little bit. And that is really ridiculously tiny and impossible and difficult, and it melts my brain.
Yeah, I saw you doing that. That's amazing. I've known one other person who did that, and that's one of those. It's like, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't be wowed yet. I mean, I haven't yet actually disassembled a mechanical watch movement and reassembled it, because you have to clean it, and you need special solvents, and you need like special lubricants and stuff, which are applied in the most microscopic quantities.
Wow.
I haven't got there yet. At the moment, I'm sort of changing batteries and crystals and straps, and I've replaced the movement out of this watch here. In fact,
cool.
This rotary watch, which I got in a bunch of like spares and repairs on eBay, and it was just buggered. Changing the battery didn't fix it, and it was one of those movements that can't really be worked on. So I just got a new movement and put it all back in. And that's why it's got all these fancy chronograph things. Actually, it's missing one of the hands because I lost it. So it wasn't a fully successful job.
Right. Well, but, it's a learning. And this is why you and I are on the same page. I mean, so I wanted to get a new bike. So what did I do? I bought all the parts and built it while I was going through Russian training,
Right.
Never done that before. I spent way more on the tools than I probably would have just buying a new bike.
But then you understand how it works, and you can fix it if it breaks. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm very much in favour of you learn it by doing it.
Yeah.
It's funny because you don't learn swordsmanship from reading a book, but if you can't read the book, you won't learn swordsmanship.
Yep.
At least if you're doing original research.
Yep.
It's weird.
But this has been the argument for academics for a long time. Is you cannot learn any discipline by just talking about it. You have to be doing it. So,
except maybe philosophy.
True,
maybe.
But you still have to see it in action. You still have to be able to point to things and say, this is how things work, right?
Yeah.
I've sat in meetings in my day job with professors who tell me what the State Department should be doing without ever having had to go through the process of making something happen in the State Department.
Right.
And it's like, it's really easy to say that we should be doing this thing, but you don't understand all of the interagency hoops and whistles we have to go through to get anything done, right?
Yeah.
But they don't care because they don't have to. That's not the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, theory has its place, but it should be theory and practice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, you've obviously done a lot of stuff, but I have a couple of questions that I ask most of my guests. And the first is, what's the best idea you haven't acted on yet?
So I thought of 3.
Okay.
The sword-focused one is, and I'm started doing this, translate Gisleri.
Okay. Translate Gisleri, okay.
No one's done Gisleri. I know that Gary Shellac was working on it at one point. I know that Justin, one of Justin's friends, is working on it. But I want to see what Gisleri says because he has a fascinating background history. He was cousin to a pope and was a general on the battlefield, and then he wrote his manual. So he had all that experience, and then he wrote this manual. So that's the sword one.
Okay. So hang on, what's stopping you from doing it?
Oh, I'm doing it little by little. I just, it would take putting aside so many other things to focus on it. And so that's why it's,
okay.
I've acted kind of on it, but I haven't gotten more than like a couple paragraphs into it, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, when you're translating a whole book, a couple of paragraphs is like the warm-up to the beginning.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. The thing that I've thought about my entire, a lot of my life that I haven't done is I want to buy a timber frame barn and construct it out on some land and build a house around that barn.
Okay. Not what I was expecting.
I love timber frames. I love timber frame houses. And I love the idea of this 300 or 400-year-old timber frame structure that I can then feel free to design my living space inside, you know?
There's people doing that at the moment and documenting it.
Yep.
And they also, they run a woodworking magazine. Damn it, I'm on their mailing list and I've bought some of their books.
Yep.
Okay.
I have two of them. I know what you're talking about. Tenon?
Yeah, Mortise and Tenon magazine.
Mortise and Tenon. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, and they have this project of they're restoring this old house and it's all wood and it's all very jack planes and mallets and
Yep.
Okay, so why haven't you done it?
Because I haven't settled down in any one place to have the land that I want, you know?
Okay.
After we were in Houston and then I went to law school and then we were in foreign service. So we moved around the world a couple times and then we came back here to DC. We bought this house and we've been working. So now.
But you're not in foreign service anymore, right?
Not in the foreign service anymore. I resigned from the foreign service, resigned my commission and took up a civil service position. But still in the State Department. So now in the back of my head, I'm kind of keeping an eye out for different pieces of land around, you know, I don't know, Pennsylvania, New York, something like that.
So if anyone listening has a 300-year-old barn on a piece of land that they might want to get rid of, they should talk to you.
Sure.
You never know.
There are companies who do it. They'll buy these barns, they'll take them down, and then they will sell them as kits. So there's those things too. Yeah.
That's not actually a bad way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, because anyone who wants to take down their timber frame barn can just contact this company, and they're like, "Yeah, we'll give you this money for it, and then we'll clean the timbers, replace the ones that are done for, you know, and then they sell. You can go online and find. They will show you what the barn does look like. Some of them even use AutoCAD to show you kind of the design inside the barn. So yeah, no, it's a whole thing here.
Wow. Okay. So you just need to make a ton of money.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's not really that much opportunity to embezzle shit in the State Department, is there?
Well, and of course, I don't want to. I was asked to break the law once and told them no, and that was an interesting little adventure.
Okay, what happened? Or can't you talk about it?
With that, I worked for an office that, trying to figure out how to say this well. We were asked to share something with another U.S. agency. And because the State Department is outward looking, there are rules against what we can do with inward looking agencies. Does that make sense?
Right. So like difference between CIA and FBI.
Yeah, pretty much. DHS and State Department, right? State Department is international. DHS is the homeland. Yeah. So there are some strong rules about what we are allowed to, because basically we can't spend our money on something that is inside the U.S. That's a very big State Department rule. So if we did something, if we did a report that looked inside the U.S., that crosses a whole lot of legal lines.
Okay.
So I was acting office director, and I was asked to sign off on doing exactly that. And the paper that I was looking at had our lawyer's paragraph telling us this is something we cannot do. So I just replied to that email with that cut and paste saying this is something we cannot do. And my bosses were not happy with me.
You'd think they would be like, oh, well, I'm jolly glad David spotted that because otherwise we might end up in jail.
You'd think, but this was an interesting time, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, so obviously they knew that it was against the law and they were hoping you wouldn't notice.
Yeah.
Which is another way of saying they're hoping you were crap at your job.
That or browbeating, that do what we say. Just do what we say, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Fair enough. All right. So that's two. You've had the translate Gisliere, build a barn. What's the third one?
The third one is I want to ride a bike across northern Italy, stopping every evening to cook with the local Italians.
That's a brilliant idea. Can I come?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, man. Because I mean, it would be like 30 miles a day. It wouldn't be much because you'd have to get there in the late afternoon and then just kind of go in and cook dinner. There's hills,
Okay.
But then, the next day you write off all those calories that you ate the night before.
Oh, dude, I'm going to be behind you in a hired Lamborghini. I'm not cycling. They're hills.
Yeah,
I once tried to take a walk in the Italian sort of countryside outside Lucca, and it is very difficult to safely be not a car on those roads, and actually difficult to be safely a car on those roads too. So, what I'll be doing is I'll say I'm not a Lamborghini, because that would be a bit
much.
Not a good choice for this purpose, because it would be too loud and noisy, and it wants to go fast. But you need a car behind you so that the other cars behind you aren't going to kill you.
I have heard hints that there are people who actually have tours like this now. That basically there is a car that goes from town to town, and you give your stuff with it if you want to, your suitcase or your backpack or whatever, and then you're just free to ride. So I've been told that these things exist. I just haven't looked them up.
And we need to setting up the cooking side of things shouldn't be that difficult, because through the historical martial arts connections, we sort of have access to Italians in just about every town in Italy.
Yeah, and just simply even that, or even just call some nice restaurants and say, hey, I'd like to learn what you know. I'll be there this evening. And I bet a lot of them be like, sure, come on by.
In a restaurant? I doubt it.
The smaller restaurants. I'm talking the smaller towns, where they're like
maybe.
family run.
Have you ever been in a professional kitchen?
In a professional? Okay, I've been in one. I've never worked in one, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's like there isn't a lot of room for people who don't know what they're doing.
Nah, you're right. You're right there. That's true.
Probably better off getting like historical fencers in these places just to take you home, and you can help their mum cook.
Yeah. Yep.
And you'll definitely get the calories in that way.
Yep, and that's true, because that ties in the whole fencing thing, and that would be even more fun.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think you should definitely do that.
I do too. My brother and I took our sons to northern Italy, and we roamed around Trento and Bolzano, and we saw all the biking trails that were already built into the sides of the hills and stuff. And this is what kind of got my head thinking, either here up in the way north Italy, or down in around Florence to Bologna, for instance, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, good ideas. I think you should act on them, especially the last one.
I hope to. Yep.
Okay, last question. Somebody gives you a proverbial $1 million to spend improving historical martial arts worldwide. How would you spend it?
So what I came up with is this. I would put that $1 million in an interest-bearing account or endowment, and then I would use the proceeds to fund a series of seminars and tournaments.
Okay.
I might also use it to set up like a training system or school for training judges, so that we could have an actual training process for judges. And then if it grew big enough, I might take a chunk for research grants and give people a few $1,000s to go study at the New York Library, or some other place to do some research.
$1 million well invested should be bringing in 50 to 100 grand a year.
That's exactly what I have here. I was thinking 50 to 80,000. LBC comes in at under $10,000, and it makes a small profit each year. So let's say I was given a $3,000 grant for Lord Baltimore's challenge. I could then buy a really nice venue, keep charging the same amount for everyone, and I wouldn't have to raise my prices. So that kind of a thing, you could do 10 of those a year, just help other people out.
Yeah, it's a nice broad focus. So you like grants for people running events, grants for research, grants for these various other things. The trick, of course, always is you'd need to have some kind of filtering process.
Right. You need to have a committee or something.
And it can't be David's mates get the cash.
Damn it.
Well, it can be.
Right. No, you're right. Because if I set up an endowment, it would have to be a legal organization. So it would have to have its own rules, right?
Yeah, and you'd actually have to follow them.
Yep. Imagine that.
And if you're going to change them, you'd have to go through a due process and let everybody know. And
that never happens.
Yeah. And never go ultra vires. Okay. What specifically would you want the fund to achieve? What is the thing? What is the gap that you want to fill, or the area of weakness that you want to strengthen?
Two to enable people who are in smaller, distant areas who want to do a small thing, maybe just a saber-only focused tournament, or who don't have the chops to do, 15 tournaments over a weekend or whatever. I want to help out the people who have good ideas but don't know where to start with them and don't have the money to do it themselves. I was lucky enough that I had an open credit card when I started Lord Baltimore's Challenge, and I made all that money back, so I still had an open credit card. So,
right.
But not everyone has that. So I would want to. This is what I did in the SCA. So I created some rules under the arts and sciences umbrella for studying historical swordplay. And I wrote the rules broadly so that you could study any type of historical martial arts you wanted to inside the SCA. Now, not tournaments, but this is study. This is like demonstrations and things.
Yeah.
But I wrote it as broadly as I could so it could help everyone. People who wanted to do armazares, people who wanted to do grappling, whatever. So this is the same kind of thing. I would want to put in place a framework that people could use for whatever study they wanted to do. And I guess the rules would say has to be pre-1900, pre-1800, martial art or something like that.
Okay. So, but then, like, would you consider jousting a martial art?
I would.
Okay. Yeah, I would too. but not everybody would, because it's more, the joust is basically a combat sport that has been artificial. It takes a military skill and makes a sport out of it.
Technically, almost everything we do is that.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, I have no problem with that. You still have techniques. You have techniques that were used in actual battles that they demonstrate on horseback. You can, depending on how you run your joust, it can be more or less closer to a combat or to the very long lances that were the big demonstrations. Nonetheless, I would want to be more agnostic about make your case. We have between $2,000 and let's say $15,000 grants that we can give you. Make your case to us, and if you make your case well enough, then we'll give you a grant. That kind of thing.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Yeah, it's funny how money makes all sorts of things a lot easier, and I would want this to kind of skew towards the areas with lower standards of living, lower costs of living.
Yep.
So, like, $1,000 to somebody living in, I don't know, Arizona is a different thing to $1,000 to someone living in, shall we say, Peru.
100%. Cost of living can be taken into account. So, I think so.
So that $1 million will go a lot further in places where the money just simply goes further.
Right. And so that would be part of the judgment. Part of the thing would be like, how will this impact you? Some people might say, hey, $2,000 is all we would ever need for this, weekend seminar, for instance, right?
Right. Okay.
I'll say this. This is an interesting point. I talk about this too. I would never want someone to get a grant that makes everything free for people.
Right.
And here's why. Throughout my 25, 30 years of doing this, I have grown convinced that students who have a little bit of skin in the game are far more focused and more interested and learn more than if you walk in for free and you're just like there. So even charging $20 to enter to get into my seminar, for instance, I get a higher class of interested students than when I teach for free at places.
Yeah. And there's a big difference between choosing to teach for free for good reasons,
right, and
the students getting it entirely for free.
Right.
And it's like, there are places I've been where, $10 for a day's instruction was all that could reasonably be charged. And at the end of the day, I don't take any money for it because it's not enough money to be worth my, I like to either get paid properly or not at all. I don't like to get paid a little bit. Right. But having that small fee, it makes people, basically it requires a certain commitment from them.
Yep.
Which then makes the whole experience better for everybody. So it matches my experience anyway.
Yeah, and it's the same as I said for Lord Baltimore's Challenge is if I open the tournaments up to anyone who came into Lord Baltimore's Challenge, you get overwhelmed by people signing up. But if you make a bit of a price on them, it makes people think, do I really want to do that, or do I just want to go and watch? And so you filter that.
And from what I saw at Lord Baltimore's challenge twice now, the people who were in the tournament all really wanted to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was most of the people at the event, I think.
I think so. I'm very happy with who has come and with the camaraderie. And you've mentioned this, and others have mentioned this. It's showing that our two, on the one hand, very close and similar, on the other hand, very different groups have everything in common. They just need to come together and see it, right?
Yeah. So SCA and historical martial arts.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's tricky because like one thing I found when I was judging the tournament, as a ring director, was that the SCA tended to hit very light, and the HEMA people tended to hit a bit hard, and so I would have to kind of force calibrate the HEMA people down a bit and force calibrate the SCA people up a bit to get to a kind of mutually acceptable standard where yes, that hit was definitely made.
Yep.
And yeah, but like the one thing I was really pleased to see is the historical martial arts people very quickly picked up on the SCA thing of acknowledging hits against yourself. And I saw people like several times like disallow a hit that they'd been awarded. Like, actually, no, I don't think I hit him cleanly enough, so I won't take that hit.
Did you watch at ISMAC? Did you watch the rapier tournaments there? Did you ever go and watch those? Because I've got a relevant story.
The last ISMAC I went to was in 2007, I think. So okay. I don't actually recall. Probably, and I was probably involved in judging some of them. And I certainly did demonstration bouts at least one of the ISMACs. So
I don't. Okay, the two I went to, which I think were like 2002 and 3 or 3 and 4, something like that. I went to 2 in a row. I won both tournaments, both the rapier tournaments, and Martinez ran it. I remember McDonald was one of the maestros. I think Sean Hayes was. I can't remember. Anyway, you might have been as well. I can't remember who all. We had one on each corner, and then Martinez was the ring director floating. Okay. So the very first tournament, the 3 winners were all SCA fencers.
Yep.
As we got toward the finals, we were doing the same thing we do in the SCA. So one of my bouts was with Brian Wilson of Darkwood Armory. We had an exchange. He hit my hand. None of the judges saw it, but I took a step back and I held my hand up. And Martinez walked up and he's like, "Everything okay?" And I said, "Oh yeah, he hit my hand." And he looked around and all the judges kind of shrugged and he said, "Okay, point to Brian," right? And then we had a couple other things where I think James, the guy who came in third, called back a shot. He's like, "No, I didn't get that shot. I don't want to be awarded that shot." And he got mad because the judges were like, "No, you're going to take that shot." Right? They gave him points and he was like, "No, I didn't hit him." So the very next year, Martinez made a big speech at the beginning of the next tournament. And he said, last year's tournament was the most honorable I've ever seen, with people acknowledging blows. And he said, I would love to see that again. And we did it again, But so we were taking the SCA culture of acknowledge your blows and be honorable about it, and we were kind of blending it into ISMAC, and I was thrilled. It made me so happy to see that it started coming out, and you saw that in Lord Baltimore's challenge, just like you just said. The HEMA people were like, "Oh, this is what we do here. This is what we're going to do." Yeah,
because people respond to the culture that they're in. And if that's the expected thing, and most critically, if that's, you get social credit for being seen to be honorable. Like people respect you for acknowledging hits against yourself.
Yep. Right? And I mean, that's
a critically important part of it.
All it takes is one bad tournament where you're not calling blows to destroy your reputation, for everyone to look at you as side-eye, So,
although I do know someone from the SCA whose arm was broken through their armor and who didn't call the hit because he said it was light.
Yep.
That's a broken arm through plate arm.
I've heard of that before too. I just can't. So when Roger Siggs was the Kingdom Rapier Marshal for his area, for his region, he put in place a rule, which is, it's controversial, but I loved it. You could not call light without following up with, "You need to hit me harder." And so what this did is people would fight and someone would back up and go, "Light, you need," and they'd stop for a second and be like, "No, that was good. You hit me." It wasn't perfect, but it proved a point, I think.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, brilliant. Thanks so much for joining me today, David. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thanks, Guy. I always love talking to you. And let me know if I can help or throw you any more information for this.
Thanks for listening. You can find the episode show notes at swordschool.com/podcast, where you will find transcriptions, photos, videos, and links for this episode. You can find a direct link to the show notes for this episode in the description. Join us next week for another cracking conversation. See you then.